In this video, I'm crafting a medieval windmill out of XPS foam. This structure is built at 32mm scale and will be perfect for my fantasy-themed tabletop wargames and RPGs. I start off by cutting down my XPS foam. Extruded polystyrene is a rigid, durable foam originally intended for insulation purposes. I find that it makes a perfect crafting material because of its ability to be cut down, hold its shape, and take texture well. The first part to be built is the brick foundation. Strips of XPS foam are cut down into individual bricks on the tabletop hot wire cutter. Freshly cut foam looks too sharp to resemble stone. To fix this, I shake the bricks in a container full of rocks. This will dull the edges and give the bricks a stone texture. The bricks are then glued together to form the base. Afterwards, each new row of bricks is staggered, making sure to overlap the middle of the bricks over the previous row's gap. With the foundation complete, it's time to start on the main floor of the windmill. Thin pieces of foam are cut out to make up the walls of the structure. Medieval buildings commonly had a texture to them created by the stucco that was used. To get this texture, I used some rolled up tin foil. Next is the timber detailing. To make my foam look like wood, I'm using a handheld hot wire cutter. This creates a really nice deep texture that looks more like wood than actual wood at this scale. For certain parts of the build, I print out pieces of a blueprint I created prior to the crafting process. This piece is used to help place the windows on my wall. I'm using 3D printed windows for efficiency and to create a consistent look with my other buildings. There was a slight measurement error here, which can thankfully be resolved and covered up easily. Thinner pieces of foam are used to create the iconic medieval timber framing of the walls. I then attach some larger timber beams which will make up the corners of the main floor. The other larger wall is created using similar techniques, with the difference of having no windows. The second story floor is going to have an entrance which is created with this 3D printed door. Once all the walls are complete, I glue them one by one to the wood frame that was created earlier. The main floor is then attached to the brick foundation. A door is added to the first floor, matching the style of the door that was created earlier. Larger timber pieces are then glued onto the top of the second story to finish off the main floor. Next up is the wooden structure that juts out from the main floor and the roof. To get a perfect fit, I'm using a printout from my template. I create wood texture by using a dull pencil for the larger grooves. I also take some nicks out of the pieces with my X-Acto knife for some added detail, and a hot wire cutter for the smaller texture. The structure is then snugly attached to the rest of the windmill. I then begin with the roof of the structure, starting with the tall gables. It was at this point I noticed my measurements were a little off and the wooden structure was too wide. Thankfully with the wood glue, there's some flexibility in the working time and I was able to remove this piece and cut it down to the right size. I finished the gables with some wood detailing and a hole for the windmill dowel. This section is then glued onto the rest of the structure. Wooden planks are then placed one by one on the underlying frame. These are stylized to look more interesting since some of the roof will be showing through in the end result. The other side of the roof is covered in a similar way, with the difference of leaving room for the wooden structure that juts out. A large beam is cut out and placed on top of the roof to create a nice finish. After the roof, I move on to the wooden structure of the secondary story. Every so often I use one of my miniatures to make sure everything is to proper scale. The trick to making this section durable is to make it similar to a real-life wooden structure, mixing vertical planks with the horizontal pieces above. In addition to the texture, I use varying sizes of planks and gaps between the foam, which helps make this material look more like wood. The large beams have 3 points of contact which provide a bunch of support when dried. As you can see, I did not wait for the glue to dry and had to reposition the beams once again. A staircase is created using strips of textured foam. I want this to be playable, so I make sure the steps have enough room to accommodate a 32mm base. The railing is created for the wooden structure, starting with the posts. I'm also testing to make sure there's still enough room for the model. Next is the windmill portion of the structure. Thin strips are cut out and glued together. I designed these in a stylized way, making sure the planks are different sizes and varying widths apart. The 4 pieces are then glued to the center point. Once dried, more glue is added for durability. I'm cutting out a bunch of shingles to finish off the roof. These are textured in strips and then cut out individually. These are then placed on the roof one by one, leaving gaps in the shingles to see the underlying roof structure for some extra visual interest. Supports are cut out using a miter box for some finishing details on the build. I start with a black primer before I put any color on this windmill. I decided to use my airbrush for this process since there's a bunch of small cracks that are hard to reach with a brush, especially in the roof area. The stones are painted by mixing a few grayish greens together and overbrushing the paint on top of the black primer. The stucco texture is painted off-white to give the windmill an aged look. The wood is painted in a few coats of brown, making sure to clean up any of the off-white that went outside of the lines. Once dried, I clean up the paint job with a smaller brush. To make the wood more interesting, I build up the color with lighter hues of brown. I like to dry brush these highlights in a gradient to really stand out on the tabletop. I want these shingles to have a high fantasy look, so I'm painting them in a colorful teal. Starting with a darker shade, then brightening them up with a lighter dry brush. Next is the weathering. Pigment is created by shaving down a soft pastel. This is then brushed onto all the joints of the structure. This creates a shadow color between the wood pieces and the stucco that helps tie everything together. To add extra contrast to the windmill, I mixed together flock and PVA glue to create some moss. This is brushed on in selective spots where I think it'd look most interesting. Afterwards, finishing touches are added, including finally gluing the windmill onto the structure. I align this section with a couple of machine blocks and let it sit to dry overnight. And at this point, the medieval windmill is considered done. Here's some shots of the terrain piece from different angles. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for future hobby content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.